Hand over your encryption keys, Matthew, or you're done, Roger sneered, sliding the termination letter forward. I signed without looking, walked out, and pressed the switch. He actually thought he could replace me with a 26-year-old kid who just finished a 6-week boot camp. He thought a corporate title was a magic wand that could wave away 16 years of customized algorithmic engineering. But standing there in his corner office, looking at the smug grin on his face and the nervous sweat on his son Nicholas's forehead, I realized how blind greed really makes a man. I did not raise my voice. I did not make a scene. I just slid the folder back across his desk, grabbed my coat, and walked. They had no idea my license expired at midnight. 16 years, that is how long I have been the quiet spine of Cole & Associates Wealth Management. When I started back in 2010, the office was a cramped suite on the third floor of a half-empty commercial block in Chicago, smelling of stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. Roger was just another desperate broker trying to cold call high-net-worth individuals, surviving on credit cards and sheer panic. I was a 32-year-old quantitative developer who had walked away from the high-frequency trading firms of Wall Street, tired of the 80-hour weeks but obsessed with the mathematics of market volatility. Back then, we only had $12 million in assets under management. Roger was a salesman, nothing more. He could talk a wealthy dentist into transferring his retirement account, but he could not tell the difference between a simple moving average and a Monte Carlo simulation. He needed an engine, a system that could consistently generate alpha while protecting client downside. So I built it in 2012. After 2 years of living on takeout pizza and sleeping under my desk, I completed the codebase for K-Code. It was not just a script. It was a proprietary multi-factor portfolio optimization and automated rebalancing engine. It took real-time data feeds, calculated risk premiums across 7 asset classes, and executed high-efficiency trades with zero human latency. It was elegant, brutal, and incredibly profitable. But I was not stupid. Even in 2012, I knew Roger's character. I saw how he looked at the money coming in, how his eyes glazed over when the quarterly performance fees arrived. Before I deployed K-Code onto our staging servers, I had my personal attorney draft a rigid, ironclad software licensing agreement. The contract was simple. The intellectual property of K-Code belonged solely to Matthew Vance. The firm, Cole & Associates, was granted a non-transferable, revocable license to utilize the compiled binary for its internal trading systems. The annual fee was a modest $120,000, but the crucial part was Clause 9. The license was tied directly to my active employment. If I was ever terminated, or if I resigned for cause, the license would automatically terminate exactly 24 hours after my departure. Any continued use of K-Code past that deadline would constitute willful copyright infringement under Title 17, Section 504 of the United States Code, carrying statutory damages of $15,000 per day. Roger signed it back then without reading it. He was too busy celebrating our first $5 million client to care about the legal boilerplate. For the next 14 years, that contract sat in a secure drawer, while K-Code turned our tiny firm into a quiet powerhouse. By 2026, our assets under management had grown to $150 million, and 60% of that money, a staggering $90 million, belonged to one entity, Thorne Capital, led by Charles Thorne. Charles is a legendary investor in his mid-50s, a sharp, no-nonsense businessman who built his fortune in commercial shipping. He did not care about Roger's expensive suits or the fancy mahogany conference tables. He cared about numbers. He stayed with us for one reason only: the consistent, market-beating returns generated by the K-Code engine, and the fact that I was the one managing it. Every Monday morning, Charles and I would sit down for a brief 10-minute call. We talked about volatility curves, macro hedging, and liquidity constraints. I was the key man. Roger was just the guy who forwarded the invoices. But success breeds a very specific kind of rot. As the fees piled up, Roger began to believe his own marketing brochures. He bought a house in Palm Beach, a Porsche he did not know how to drive properly, and started talking about legacy planning. That legacy, it turned out, was his son. Nicholas arrived at the firm in late 2025, fresh out of college and a brief stint at a luxury resort. He was 26, wore suits that were too tight, and had the unearned confidence of someone who has never had his work peer-reviewed. Roger immediately installed him as a senior analyst and gave him a corner desk right next to mine. "Watch Matthew, son," Roger had told him on his first day. "Learn how the engine works. We need to internalize the process." I knew what that meant. Roger did not want to pay my annual licensing fee anymore, and he certainly did not want to pay the accrued performance bonuses that had been building up over the last 5 years. Under my partnership agreement, I was owed a $2.5 million payout, scheduled to vest at the end of the fiscal year. Roger looked at that $2.5 million not as a debt of honor to the man who built his firm, but as a personal loss. So, the plan was hatched. Nicholas was supposed to shadow me, copy my workflows, and figure out how to operate K-code so they could push me out before the payout date. For 6 months, I watched Nicholas try to comprehend the codebase. He would ask questions about the API endpoints, try to sneak looks at my screen, and make suggestions about simplifying the algorithmic constraints. I kept my mouth shut, answered his questions with dry technical jargon that went entirely over his head, and made sure all the critical administrative keys remained securely on my physical YubiKey hardware token. By the time late autumn rolled around, Roger's patience was wearing thin. The market was showing signs of significant turbulence, and Charles Thorne was calling daily, wanting to ensure our hedging parameters were tight. I worked late nights, adjusting the code, keeping the Thorne Capital portfolio insulated from the swings, and that is when the trap was laid. It started on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. The volatility index had spiked 3 points in early trading, and the market was experiencing a massive sell-off in mid-cap tech stocks, which made up a significant portion of Thorne Capital's portfolio. I was at my desk by 6 in the morning, watching the live feeds from the Bloomberg terminals, adjusting the volatility coefficients in K-code's config file. At 9 o'clock, Roger walked in, followed by Nicholas. Nicholas looked smugger than usual, carrying a blue folder. Roger didn't go to his office. He walked straight to my desk. "Matthew, we need to talk in my office," Roger said, his voice flat. He didn't wait for a response, turning around and walking toward the glass-walled room at the end of the hall. I locked my workstation, pocketed my YubiKey, and followed them. When I walked in, Nicholas was already sitting in one of the leather guest chairs, his legs crossed, tapping his shiny leather shoes. Roger stood behind his desk, hands flat on the polished wood. "Sit down, Matthew," Roger said. I remained standing. "I have 2 active trades executing right now to hedge the Thorne positions." "What's this about, Roger?" Roger sighed, a rehearsed theatrical sigh. "It's about efficiency. We've been looking at the numbers, specifically your licensing fee and the performance bonus structure. The market is shifting, Matthew. We need to be lean." "Lean?" I looked at him. "The firm is up 40% over the last 3 years, largely because of the K-code engine. The $2.5 million performance bonus is already accrued in the firm's capital account. It is my contractually agreed share of the management fees. Contracts can be renegotiated." Nicholas piped up, a greasy smile on his face. "We feel that a $2.5 million payout to a single employee is outdated. We are running a team here, Matthew." I ignored Nicholas and kept my eyes on Roger. "You want to renegotiate my compensation weeks before the vesting date?" "We want to restructure it," Roger corrected. "We want to transition you to a flat salary. No licensing fees for K-code. The firm will take full ownership of the repository. Nicholas has spent the last 6 months analyzing the engine, and he tells me it's mostly legacy code that we can maintain internally. In exchange, we'll offer you a generous base salary of $200,000 a year." I almost laughed. $200,000 a year to manage a $90 million portfolio using an engine I wrote while you pocket-accrued bonus? "That bonus will be distributed into a general pool for the firm's expansion," Roger said, his voice hardening. "This is the deal, Matthew. You hand over the administrative keys and the Git repository password to Nicholas today, and we sign the new employment contract. If not, we will have to make a difficult decision. I am not handing over my source code," I said quietly, "and I am not signing away my licensing rights. K-code is my personal property under the 2012 agreement. The compiled binaries you run on our servers are licensed to the firm, not owned by it. Nicholas scoffed. Please, it's just Python and C++ wrapper scripts. I've already copied the repository from the local staging server. I can run the system without your keys. I looked at Nicholas, then back at Roger. You let your son copy the repository? That is a direct breach of the intellectual property protocols. This is my company, Matthew, Roger said, slamming his hand on the desk. I own everything under this roof. If you refuse to cooperate, you are being insubordinate. You are refusing to perform your duties, and that gives me cause for immediate termination. Is that your final decision, Roger? I asked, my voice steady. Sign the transfer agreement, or you're fired. Roger growled, sliding a blue folder toward me. And if you're fired for cause, you forfeit the vesting bonus. We'll tie you up in court for 10 years before you see a single dollar of that $2.5 million. I looked at the folder, then at the pen on the desk. I did not touch them. I won't sign, I said. Roger's face turned red. Then you are done. Get your things. You are fired, Matthew. Effective immediately. Nicholas is the new director of quantitative strategy. We don't need your overpriced license, and we don't need your attitude. Hand over your office badge and your keys. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the office RFID card, and laid it gently on the desk. Understood, I said. And your encryption key, Nicholas added, leaning forward. The hardware token on your keychain. That YubiKey is my personal property, purchased with my own funds, containing my private authentication certificates, I replied calmly. You do not have a legal right to it. It has the access keys to the trading system, Roger yelled. It has my access keys, I corrected. Your IT department can revoke my credentials in the Active Directory. If Nicholas is as capable as he claims, he can generate his own credentials. I turned, walked out of the office, and went to my desk. The office was quiet. The junior analysts were pretending to look at their screens, but they had heard the shouting. I packed my leather briefcase with my personal notebooks, my mug, and my noise-canceling headphones. I did not touch the company-owned laptop. I did not log back into the trading terminal. I had already logged out before entering Roger's office. Nicholas stood at the end of the row, arms crossed, watching me like a warden. Make sure he doesn't delete anything, Roger called out from his office door. He's not touching the keyboard. Nicholas replied smugly. I snapped my briefcase shut, put on my overcoat, and walked toward the exit. As I reached the heavy glass doors of the lobby, I stopped and turned to look at Roger one last time. He was standing by his office door, looking triumphant, nodding to his son. I smiled, a small, polite smile. Have a good Thanksgiving, Roger, I said. I pushed the door open and walked out into the cold Chicago wind. It was 10:15 a.m. on Tuesday. The clock was ticking. In exactly 24 hours, the K-Code license would officially expire. I got home to my apartment in Lincoln Park by 11 o'clock. The place was quiet. I made myself a cup of black coffee, sat down at my custom-built workstation, and turned on the multi-monitor display. I didn't feel angry. In corporate finance, anger is a luxury that clouds your judgment. I had a plan, and I had the contract. My first phone call was to my intellectual property attorney, Edward Finch. Edward was a veteran of the tech licensing wars in Chicago. He knew every comma of my 2012 agreement with Cole & Associates because he had drafted it himself. They did it, Edward, I said when he answered. Roger fired me. He wants to keep K-Code and run the portfolios under his son. Edward let out a dry, short laugh. Did he sign the exit paperwork? He didn't sign the transfer folder. He just declared me terminated for cause, because I refused to hand over my hardware tokens and sign away my licensing rights. Perfect, Edward said, under Section 9 of the licensing agreement. A termination for any reason immediately triggers the 24-hour revocation countdown. Since you were terminated today, Tuesday, at 10:15 in the morning, the license to run the K-Code binary expires tomorrow, Wednesday, at 10:15. Have you prepared the formal notice? I'm drafting it now, I said. I'll send it via certified mail and email to Roger, the board of directors, and their head of compliance, Victoria Rogers. Good, Edward said. I will file the official copyright declaration with the U.S. Copyright Office, indicating the active revocation of the derivative binary usage. If they run a single trade utilizing K-Code after 10:15 tomorrow morning, they are in willful violation of 17 U.S.C. Section 504. That carries statutory damages of $15,000 per day. Plus, we can seek an emergency federal injunction to freeze their trading servers. I'll handle the technical side, I said. Keep your phone close. After hanging up, I plugged my YubiKey into my home workstation. The K-Code engine was hosted on a secure AWS EC2 instance that Cole and Associates rented. However, the core mathematical libraries and the proprietary volatility databases did not reside on their servers. They were fetched dynamically from my personal, encrypted AWS S3 bucket. Every morning at market open, the K-Code binary running on the firm's servers sent a secure API request to my private server. The request checked my personal public key signature to verify that the active license token was valid. If the signature was valid, my server returned the daily volatility coefficients and the decrypted algorithm updates required to execute the trades. If the license token was revoked, or if my server stopped responding, the compiled K-Code binary would enter a read-only, safe-fail mode. It would not execute new hedges. It would lock the current portfolio allocations to prevent unauthorized automated trading. I opened my terminal. I wrote a small command line script to update the configuration file on my server Oz S3CP license revocation.json, S3:/K-Code-auth-bucket.likes.json. I hesitated for a second, then pressed enter. The terminal screen flickered. Upload. License revocation.json to S3:/K-Code-auth-bucket.lac.json. Had begun. At exactly 10:15 a.m. tomorrow, the license verification script would return a 403 forbidden error. The K-Code engine running on Cole and Associates servers would instantly freeze. Next, I drafted the certified email to the board of directors and the compliance department. I attached the 2012 licensing agreement, the formal letter of termination signed by Roger, and Edward's official notice of copyright revocation. I carbon copied Charles Thorne, the CEO of Thorne Capital. Charles needed to know. He was my client. His $90 million was currently sitting in a volatile market, and the engine managing it was about to go dark. It was 1 p.m. when I sent the email. I knew Roger would probably ignore it, thinking it was just lawyer bluster. He was too arrogant to believe he didn't own the system. At 3 p.m., my personal cell phone rang. The caller ID showed Charles Thorne. I picked it up. Charles. Matthew, what the hell is going on? Charles's deep voice boomed through the speaker. I just received an email from your lawyer about a copyright revocation. Roger's office told me you were let go because of a minor administrative reorganization. That's Roger's version, I said calmly. The truth is, Roger wanted to avoid paying my accrued $2.5 million performance bonus. He wanted me to hand over the K-Code source code and licensing rights to his son, Nicholas. When I refused, he fired me. There was a long silence on the other end. Charles was a smart man. He understood corporate greed, but he also understood operational risk. Is it true that the K-Code engine is going offline tomorrow morning? Charles asked, his voice low and serious. Yes, the license expires at 10:15. After that, the system will enter fail-safe mode. It will not execute hedges. If the market experiences volatility tomorrow afternoon, your $90 million portfolio will be completely unhedged, and Nicholas does not have the administrative keys or the technical capability to manage it. Roger swore to me that Nicholas wrote half the code and has full control, Charles said. I let out a soft laugh. Nicholas doesn't even know how to set up the API endpoints, Charles. He has a copy of the repository, but he doesn't have the decryption keys or the dynamic volatility database feed. If he tries to run a modified version of the code, he will trigger a system deadlock, and they will be in direct violation of federal copyright law. I see, Charles said. Roger is a fool. He thinks he's the brains because he wears the suit. Thank you for telling me, Matthew. I'm calling my legal team now. I will not have $90 million of my investors' money managed by a kid who doesn't know how to drive a car, let alone hedge a macro portfolio. Keep an eye on the market tomorrow, Charles, I said. I will. Keep me updated on your new venture, Matthew. We will talk soon. After hanging up, I sat back in my chair. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for the clock to hit 10:15. Wednesday morning arrived. The market opened at 9:30. The Federal Reserve was scheduled to release its interest rate decision at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, which meant the morning was relatively calm, but everyone was bracing for a massive wave of volatility. At 10 o'clock, I sat in my kitchen, sipping a cup of coffee, monitoring the Cole & Associates server status through a public API latency monitor I had set up years ago. At 10:14, the latency was a steady 12 milliseconds. At 10:15, the line on my monitor went dead. The K-code engine running on their AWS instance had sent its signature request, received the 403 forbidden response from my S3 bucket, and immediately entered fail-safe mode. The active API endpoints that executed trades through our primary brokerage clearinghouse were revoked. The system was now completely locked down. Within 10 minutes, the emails started. First came a generic, automated system alert from the firm's network operations center. Critical. K-code engine offline. API authorization failure. I was still on the technical alert distribution list, a detail they had forgotten to remove. Then, at 10:30, my personal phone began to ring. It was Roger. I let it ring. He called 3 times in a row, then stopped. 5 minutes later, an email from Nicholas came through. It was sent to my personal account. Matthew, it read. We are experiencing a minor connection issue with the K-code staging server. The API token seems to be blocked. Please send the backup administrative password and the decryption keys immediately. This is urgent. We are trying to adjust the hedging allocations before the afternoon Fed meeting. I didn't reply. I forwarded the email to Edward Finch. By 11 o'clock, the market began to slide. The Dow Jones was down 300 points in anticipation of the Fed's announcement. Without K-code's automated rebalancing, the Thorn Capital portfolio was completely exposed to the downside. The long tech positions were taking a beating, and the short hedges were not executing because the API was dead. At 11:15, my phone rang again. This time it was Victoria Rogers, the compliance director. I answered. Hello, Victoria. Matthew, thank you for picking up, Victoria said, her voice tight and strained. We have a massive crisis here. The trading system is locked. Nicholas tried to bypass the security check by running a modified copy of the code, but it triggered a database deadlock. The brokerage firm has frozen our trading privileges due to unusual activity alerts, and Charles Thorne is on the other line screaming. He's threatening to liquidate his entire $90 million account immediately if the system isn't restored by noon. I sent you, the board and Roger, a certified legal notice yesterday at 1 o'clock, Victoria, I said calmly. The license for K-code expired today at 10:15. Roger chose to terminate my employment, which terminated the license agreement. Nicholas attempting to bypass the security check and run a modified version of my code is a willful copyright infringement under Title 17. I know, Matthew, Victoria sighed. I read the agreement. Roger didn't tell us about the Clause 9 provision. He told the board that the software was fully owned by the firm. The board is furious. They realize we are in a massive legal liability. If Charles Thorne pulls his $90 million, the firm is dead. We won't survive the regulatory fines, let alone the loss of 60% of our revenue. Roger wanted to save $2.5 million by firing me, I said. Now he has to deal with the consequences. Can we settle this? Victoria pleaded. What are your terms? The board is willing to bypass Roger entirely. We are holding an emergency meeting at noon. My terms are simple, Victoria, I replied, and they are non-negotiable. First, the firm must pay my accrued $2.5 million performance bonus in full via certified bank wire before the trading keys are restored. Second, the firm must pay a one-time intellectual property licensing settlement of $150,000 to cover the unauthorized use of the K-code binaries and Nicholas's attempts to modify it. Third, Roger Cole must be removed from all operational authority at the firm. I will not license my engine to a company managed by a man who tries to steal his employees' work. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Roger will never agree to step down. He owns 30% of the partnership shares. Then the board can buy him out or face a federal lawsuit and a complete client liquidation, I said. Charles Thorne will not wait past noon. I suggest you hold that meeting quickly. I hung up the phone at 11:45 a.m. My phone rang again. It was Roger's direct number. I answered. Matthew, you son of a bitch! Roger screamed, his voice cracking with panic. You locked the system. You're holding my company hostage. I'll sue you for sabotage. I'll have the SEC revoke your license. I haven't sabotaged anything, Roger, I said, keeping my voice cold and level. I simply revoked my personal software license upon my termination, exactly as outlined in the 2012 agreement that you signed. Nicholas tried to hack my code, which triggered your system deadlock. That's on him. We can pay you the licensing fee, Roger pleaded, his tone shifting from rage to desperation. We'll pay the $120,000. Just unlock the API. Charles Thorne is pulling his money in 15 minutes. We'll lose everything. You should have thought about that before you tried to stiff me on my $2.5 million bonus, I said. Speak to Victoria, Roger. She knows my terms. I have nothing more to say to you. I hung up. I sat at my desk and watched the clock. It was 11:50 a.m. The market was down 400 points now, and the Fed meeting was only 2 hours away. The storm was hitting, and Roger was standing in the middle of it without an umbrella. At exactly 12:15 p.m., my phone rang again. It was Victoria Rogers. Her voice was exhausted but resolved. Matthew, the board has approved your terms. Roger has signed the buyout agreement. He is relinquishing his role as managing partner and will remain a silent, non-voting shareholder until we transition him out entirely next month. Nicholas has been escorted from the building by security. We have initiated the bank wire transfer for the $2.5 million performance bonus, plus the $150,000 intellectual property settlement. You should see the funds in your account within the next 10 minutes. I'll verify it, I said, opening my corporate banking application on my laptop. Once you confirm receipt, please send the authorization API script to restore K-Code's normal operations. We need to stabilize the portfolios before the Fed announcement at 2. I will, I said, as soon as the wire clears. I sat in front of my screen, refreshing my banking portal. The clock ticked. 12:20 p.m., 12:22 p.m. At 12:24 p.m., the notification flashed on my screen. Incoming wire transfer $2,650,000 from Cole & Associates LLC. Status completed. $2,650,000. The fruits of 16 years of work, finally delivered, not out of their goodwill, but out of their sheer survival instinct. I opened my terminal and executed a clean Python script. S3CP license of .json S3:/kcodeauth bucket.json. The terminal updated instantly. Upload license of .json to S3:/kcodeauth bucket.json. Operations restored, Victoria. I texted her. The API endpoint should be active in 90 seconds. Let your IT team run a database cleanup to clear Nicholas's deadlock. A minute later, the latency monitor on my kitchen screen returned to a steady 12 milliseconds. The K-Code engine was back online, pulling the volatility databases, executing hedges, and stabilizing Thorne Capital's $90 million portfolio just in time for the Fed's rate announcement. But I was not going back. That afternoon, I called Charles Thorne. The system is running, Charles, I told him. Your portfolio is secure, but as of today, my license with Cole & Associates is temporary. I have granted them a 60-day wind-down period to transition their other clients off the engine. After that, Code is leaving their servers permanently. I expected as much, Charles said. My legal team has already drafted the termination notice for Cole & Associates. We are invoking the key man termination clause in our agreement. Our $90 million portfolio is moving. Where are you going, Matthew? I'm launching my own firm, Vance Quantitative Advisory, I said. I've already registered the LLC. I have the office space lined up in the Loop, and I'll be running the next generation version of K-Code. Good, Charles said. Send me the onboarding paperwork tomorrow morning. You've managed my money for 14 years, Matthew. I'm not about to let anyone else do it. We'll be your first client. Over the next 2 months, the transition went exactly as planned. Vance Quantitative Advisory opened its doors in early 2027. Charles Thorne's $90 million was successfully transferred to my custody, representing a massive blow to Cole & Associates. Without their anchor client and without the K-Code engine, the firm's assets under management dwindled to less than $40 million. Roger Cole was forced to sell his remaining shares at a steep discount to pay off the firm's debts. He spent the winter in Florida, not in a luxury beach house, but in a modest condo, complaining to anyone who would listen about unloyal employees. Nicholas's name became toxic in Chicago's financial district. No reputable fund would hire an analyst who had triggered a database deadlock and almost got his firm sued for federal copyright infringement. He ended up working as a junior compliance reviewer at a small regional mortgage firm, far away from any trading algorithms. As for me, I sit in my new office on Wacker Drive looking out over the Chicago River. The air is cold, but the office is warm. The screens are green. My new engine, K-Code 2, is running on a private Kubernetes cluster, executing trades with 3 milliseconds of latency. I make my own coffee now. I don't have a managing partner breathing down my neck, demanding I hand over my keys to his son. I don't have to fight for my bonuses. Every dollar that comes through the door belongs to the people who actually write the code and manage the risk. It took 16 years of quiet work and 1 day of absolute chaos to get here, but looking at the numbers on my screen, I know it was worth every single line of code.